Chris Straub, and we want to welcome you back to the Engine Performance Expo. And we've got a bit of a treat today because of some technical difficulties with going across the pond to Nathan Higgins of Higgins Raceheads over in Australia. We've also got John Callies batting cleanup if we need to. So you're going to get a double shot of cylinder head technology. We could talk about some Cleveland stuff. We could talk about some SB2 stuff. We can talk about some 18-degree stuff with John Callies. And we can talk about some Pro Stock stuff with Mr. Callies, two heads that he developed. So let's see if we got Mr. Higgins live over in Australia. Looks like we've got a little mic deal. So while we're waiting for Nathan to come up and on.
Is that it?
Yeah. We got you, Nathan. Glad to have you. We can see you and we can hear you, bud.
Well, it's just cut out a couple of times, but we're here now, so let's go for it.
All right. Let's start out with a little history on Higgins and a little background on you, sir. There goes that technical difficulty. So we're going to try and get Nathan back in here. You know, we're trying to do this over the ocean. So, John, let's come back to your cylinder head development days at Pontiac, and if you want to start with the 18 degrees 867, or if you want to start with the Pro Stock stuff.
No, the first head that we did was the 867 head. This was back in the 80s, and what was happening in NASCAR was the Chevrolet head that was using was like a big sprinkler. At the end of 500 miles, it had more leaks than when it started. So we did a new cylinder head and got it approved, and it had a run of about, I guess, 6-7 years. And everybody who was running, including the Chevrolet guys, ran the Pontiac head. So, you know, it was a little, but we probably had more competition between Pontiac and Chevrolet than we did Pontiac and Ford or Chrysler. So it was a wild deal. But that was a very good, the head turned out, the fellow that actually developed the port work was Mike Kennedy down in North Carolina. And actually Mike, we set up, he was one of the people that worked for me in the race program.
Okay.
And Mike did a terrific job on it and developed the head. Then we cast it, made it, drew it up so it would work. So
okay.
It was success. You know, it was a successful piece.
Now you've told me a couple stories about an announcement over the intercom at one of the races by NASCAR. Could you share that little story with us, Mr. Callies?
This was back in the 80s. We were racing at Charlotte, and of course I had to give NASCAR the original cylinder head, and they carried it on the truck. So if somebody had it pulled off the engine, they could, excuse me, they could look at it. And so I was called to the NASCAR trailer, and all the tech guys are standing around, and they had pulled a head off Junior Johnson's car, which happened to have our head on it. And they're pointing to the floor of the port and saying, look at the difference between the first. And I go, what are you looking at? And they said, right there, don't you see that it's raised there? And I go, boy, you don't know anything about castings. That's just core shift. I can't help it. And I walked out the door, and they bought it. So it was an example of lucking out on, you know, saying it was okay.
Now the 867, so that was an 18-degree head. So, and I know that head started to get modified, and they would roll it to a 15 and a 13. So can you talk on that head kind of being the building block of modern day cylinder head valve angles and stuff?
What was interesting is when we did the 4-cylinder program, we found that the valve being 90 degrees to the piston top, that you had way more flow area and flame propagation. And so on a V8, trying to make a 90-degree valve angle, trying to get a push rod in became a chore.
Okay.
And even now today, they'll build some 11-degree heads, but then the guys have no way of running the push rod. So I found that out, and I had John Lingenfelder. I took 2 4-cylinder heads and made a V8, and he run it, and it proved that the power gain was there from standing the valve up.
Okay.
And so that's what led to going from a 23, 18, 15 on down.
So
yeah.
it's So really, the industry has you to thank and Pontiac for the start of the rolled valve angle and where we are today.
Yeah, I mean, it really was. And it really came from the four-cylinder program.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about NHRA Pro Stock and Pontiac?
Well, again, the only head that was used was the Chevrolet big block, and you'd weld on it for 2 weeks and then roll it over and change the ports. But it was so modified that it wouldn't last for any duration. Plus, it limited. You had Iconio, you had Rear and Morrison, and a few others that were doing that to the heads. So our factory team was Butch Leal, the rod shop, and we said, why don't we just make a new head and roll it from the beginning and put the big ports in it. And so actually that's what was the start of the big block cylinder head. And you know, Butch was our driver. He won a lot of races, was a great guy. And so that became a success. And of course, every cylinder head after that is kind of copied off that program.
And today, your head, the basis of that head is still used by
That's right.
in pro stock racing and the large cubic inch stuff and everything about that.
Right.
So
right.
now you had some involvement. I say it's a little bit of involvement, a lot of involvement in the Fiero program and that car. Can you tell us a little about the cylinder head and the engine development just in the Fiero?
Yeah, and we're going to talk tomorrow about the Fiero pace car, but we started out with because we were going to be a pace car at the Indy 500, and they had certain requirements. I had to develop a new block and cylinder head in a short period of time, and we started with doing a new port design, and a fellow by the name of Paul Vanderlee Engines, worked, and he developed the port and the dyno work. And anyway, we cast that head, and then as the race program progressed, we made an aluminum head, and of course all our aluminum heads we went through Brodex.
Okay.
So the Pontiac program was really all developed based on the aftermarket. And
Okay.
it was making relationships with people so we could get parts built fast.
Now, like in NASCAR, did NHRA or IHRA call you to the trailer about any cylinder heads and in that, or you know, I know with Oldsmobile and yep.
Yep. I mean, the thing is Olds and Warren, they did the first big block head, and we had I did the new Pontiac head, and what was wild is we had the cars built going to Pomona, and a farmer called up and said, well, we can't approve your head. And I said, what? He said, you never build a Pontiac with a big block in it. Well, then we produced 290 numbers of Canadian Pontiacs with big blocks in it and got approved. So, you know, another panic and then a solution, you know, and that was pretty cool.
Now, your experience with the 867 Pontiac small block, did you take some of those valve angles and what you learned with that head and incorporate that in the design in the big block head as far as the Pontiac head?
Well, the big block head was so different in those days. You know, like Warren was saying, the flow bench isn't, you know, it isn't right the way it's done, but that's all we had to work with. And Dale Ikey was the head porter at the rod shop.
Okay.
And so Dale developed the port, and then we shrunk it down so anybody could do what they wanted to do the port, but we didn't give the exact design away. And what was interesting is we went out to Pomona with the new heads, and Butch won Pro Stock that year.
Okay.
Yeah, Pomona.
Okay.
So, cool deal.
And then with an OEM working with the aftermarket and stuff, so did you actually at Pontiac design the rocker arm system, or did you rely on outside sources, say like Jessel, to do the rocker arm?
On the when we did the big block head, of course we had drawings of all the ports. You know, we'd saw the head up and all that, and we sent drawings down to JV, who is the owner of Brodex, and it's probably the first head print they had ever seen. So back in the day, we had a lot of fun back and forth of, you know, what the head ought to be and how do you build it. And the valve angles are just they're doing great, you know, I mean, and so the Pro Stock thing in the day, when you do a dyno pull, you would have 5 guys in the room, and each guy was responsible looking at one gauge. And so when you pulled it and you'd come up to 8,500, you'd shut it off right away. You'd run it for about 2 seconds, and then everybody tried to say what they saw. I mean, it was pretty crude, you know, compared to where we are technology today.
Budget-wise, as far as the OEMs with that, I mean, did you have a budget, or was it just whatever you needed Pontiac supplied?
No, it's the money was very limited. So we were on a small scale. I had 3 people in my group doing the race parts and working with the aftermarket. And the aftermarket was the big support for having a race program at Pontiac. And, you know, we did it on a shoestring budget. Example, let's say my budget was $5 million for all types of racing. Chevrolet's was $25 million. So,
Big difference.
So, you know, we were the small guys trying to compete with the guys with a lot of money. So, fun time. It was you know, you worked your head off. So it was good.
Well, we do appreciate you being here with us during this whole deal. And, John, we can't thank you enough. You know, your contributions to the industry and what you've given us and a future. And with that, we're going to take it to Lake Speed Jr., and we're going to talk about some sponsors. Take it away, Lake.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it. So far, what a fantastic day. A couple of technical glitches along the way, but hey, that's expected when we're doing a live internet-based show and we've got people Skyping in from all around the world, but things are going really great, and we want to thank everybody that's made this possible. One of the guys you were just listening to, John Callies, not only is he synonymous with Pontiac and crankshafts, also Morel Lifters. We want to thank John and Morel Lifters for sponsoring the Engine Performance Expo. Of course, we couldn't do this without Rottler, Total Seal, Piston Rings, another big sponsor of this event, making this all possible. Then Randy, CWT, we saw those guys yesterday, big backer of the show. Higgins Performance, you know, he was trying to get Skyped in from Australia, a couple technical glitches, but we thank them for sponsoring us and being part of this anyway. Samtech, we know that, you know, some of the guys who are watching are at vocational schools. And if you're at a voc tech school and say high school and you're looking at this as a career field, you need to consider Samtech as one of the choices and can continue your career in the motorsports industry. Because the next generation is you, and we want you to be here and be part of it. And Samtech is a great place to start that. Qualcast, Edelbrock, Comp Cams, these are the guys that are making the valve train section possible. We appreciate that so much, and that's what's going to come up here in a little while. Chuck Lynch is going to be up next with Joe to talk about some other things, but later in the day, we're going to have Billy Godbold, Ben Strader from EFI University talking about valve train, so we want to thank those who are sponsoring, making that all possible. Couldn't do it again without Holly, Melling, Elgin, Driven Racing Oil, Promax, and the Turn 2 Vice. And with that, we'll throw it back to Joe to hear from Chuck.
What a day, what a day, what a day. Yeah, my brain is swollen. I've learned so much today. They told us, don't start cars,